You can increase the security of your systems by forcing users to create complex passwords. For Windows computers that are not part of a domain, passwords are controlled by the password policies set on the local system. Go to Start, Control Panel. Let's go to Administrative Tools, and then we have the local security policy, and this lets me edit my password policy settings. If I go into Account Policies, I can see the password policy settings. One of the most common settings is the minimum password length policy. For example, I can require passwords that are at least 8 characters long. Most security experts recommend at least 8 characters or even longer. However, you have to balance this, as when passwords get too long, they're more difficult for users to remember. The next setting is the password must meet complexity requirements policy. This is either enabled or disabled. When enabled, passwords must meet the following minimum requirements. It cannot contain the user's account name or parts of the user's full name. It has to be at least 6 characters in length and have 3 of the following 4 characters: uppercase letters, lowercase letters, numbers, and symbols. So by enabling this policy, my passwords must now meet these additional requirements, in addition to the length that I've specified earlier. The maximum password age identifies the time period in which users must change their password. For example, by default, after 42 days, the user will be required to change the password. In conjunction with the maximum password age is the Enforce Password History setting. This policy remembers previous passwords. With a setting of 0, no previous passwords are remembered. This means that when it's time to change my password, I can simply use the same password that I'm currently using. By increasing this number, I can require that new passwords are not the same as any previous passwords. For example, in this case, the new password cannot be the same as any of the 4 previous passwords. However, one thing that users can do sometimes to get around the password history is simply when they're required to change their password at the end of the 42 days, they will come in and change their password 4 times and cycle back to their original password. That's where the minimum password age setting is useful. For example, if I were to set this to 2 days, users would not be able to change their password again within 2 days of having changed it. So for instance, when 42 days have passed, I will be required to change my password. My password must meet the length and complexity requirements, and it cannot be the same as any of the 4 previous passwords that I've had. Once I successfully change my password, I will be unable to change it again for 2 more days. After 2 days, I could change the password back, but if I wanted to get back to one password that I use most of the time, it would take me 8 to 10 days in order to change my password, waiting 2 days between each password change before I could specify a new password. The final setting, store passwords using reversible encryption, is usually left disabled. You want to store the passwords on the local system in an encrypted manner, so that if somebody gains access to the local system, they won't be able to read your passwords that are saved on the local computer. Another policy to look at is the account lockout policy. The account lockout policy identifies what to do when a certain number of unsuccessful logon attempts has been entered. The account lockout threshold identifies a number of invalid logon attempts. For example, it's common to have 3 invalid logon attempts. If a user tries to log on unsuccessfully 3 times in a row, the account will automatically be locked, and it will not allow any further attempts to log on. If this were set to 0, an attacker could try a password and keep trying as long as he wanted to until he could either guess or identify the password. By setting this to a number, it will lock the account after a certain number of invalid attempts. The system recommends settings for the other 2 policies. Let's look at what those policies do. The Reset Account Lockout Counter After policy identifies the period of time during which invalid attempts are tracked. For example, with a setting of 30 minutes, if I were to enter 2 bad passwords, and then if I were to wait 30 minutes longer, I could actually enter 3 more bad passwords because the counter would reset itself to 0 after 30 minutes. The account lockout duration setting locks the account for a specified period of time. So for instance, once the account lockout threshold has been reached and the account is locked automatically, the account lockout duration policy identifies how long the account stays locked. After 30 minutes, in this case, the account would automatically be unlocked, and you could try subsequent logon attempts. If an attacker were trying to guess the password with these settings, the attacker could enter 3 invalid logon attempts, at which case the account would be locked. After waiting for 30 minutes, the account would unlock itself automatically, in which case the attacker could enter 3 more invalid logon attempts. As you can see, by setting the account lockout duration to a sufficiently long period of time, it would take a long time for an attacker to enter a significant number of guesses for the password. So the password policy controls the composition of the password on the local computer, while the account lockout policy identifies what happens when invalid logon attempts are detected. You can automatically lock the account and automatically unlock the account after a period of time. The settings within these policies helps to increase the security of your system and protect your passwords.